The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to you, O Lord.
A leper came to Jesus and kneeling down, begged him and said, "If you wish, you can make me clean." Moved with pity, he stretched out his hand, touched him, and said to him, "I do will it, be made clean." The leprosy left him immediately, and he was made clean. Then, warning him sternly, he dismissed him at once. He said to him, "See that you tell no one anything, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer for your cleansing what Moses prescribed. That will be proof for them." The man went away and began to publicize the whole matter. He spread the report abroad so that it was impossible for Jesus to enter a town openly. He remained outside in deserted places, and people kept coming to him from everywhere. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Our friend the leper. Our friend the leper teaches us much about faith and much about confidence, and his public, humble prayer to Jesus inspires us. And it reminds us how Jesus desires to respond to each one of us, to touch us, to heal us. And I invite you to just spend some time reflecting on that exchange between the leper and Jesus in the coming days. It's vital to dwell on that interaction because soon the season of Lent will be upon us. And in our attempts to grow closer to God, to become more of who God is calling us to be, we will be tempted. And we will be tempted against such humble acts as we just saw the leper make. So I thought it would be good to revisit a few of the ways that evil might tempt us away from growth in love of God, and to then be reminded of some great practices for the upcoming season of Lent to help us be victorious over those temptations. In my spiritual reading, preparing for Lent recently, I was reminded of a few metaphorical ways that we can recognize how evil approaches us and how evil tempts us. We start with my favorite one. It's evil will approach us as a spoiled child. We will be attempting to break a habit or give up a certain practice, but we'll hear a voice that says, "But I want this. I want it now." And we've all been there. I know I have been the spoiled child. I've also been a parent, and I recognize over time that while it's tempting to give in to that voice, in the long run, it's better to endure the short-term meltdown, the short-term tantrum, because when we ignore that and don't feed that voice, it leads to maturity and it leads to peace. I invite you to recognize the voice of evil approaching you as a spoiled child and to ignore it. Evil will also approach us as an invitation to a secret relationship. I just invite you to think, have you ever had that friend growing up, or maybe even a boyfriend, girlfriend that you enjoyed spending time with, but something told you, gee, I don't think this is the right person to introduce to my other friends. I don't think this is the person I would bring home to my family. Pay attention to how evil might approach you as a secret relationship. We don't have to tell anybody else about this. God desires us to bring all of our relationships into the light of communion. So be cautious as evil approaches you as an invitation to a secret relationship. The third one is perhaps one of the most powerful. It's that evil will approach us as an army commander. We've all heard the scripture that Satan roams around like a lion seeking whom to devour. I invite you to just pay attention to the patience of evil as it will seek you out and and look around you for a potential point of entry. Ask God to reveal and to shore up those weaknesses that might appear as places of pride or greed or gluttony or lust. We know that we in the church militant are still in the battle, and the battle rages on. I remind you also that the war has already been won. Let us be reminded of that always and choose our side right now and ask God to shore up any kinks in our armor that we might live in peace in Him. So evil will approach as a spoiled child, as an invitation to a secret relationship, as an army commander. But so much of our growth in love of God and each other, so much of our responding to God's call to be who we are in Him is not only about avoiding temptation, but it's about pursuing growth. Okay? So it's good to recognize that we have these great traditional practices in Lent: fasting, prayer, and almsgiving. So I invite another fresh look at those three practices. Fasting is simply saying no to a lesser thing so that we could say yes, a big yes to a greater thing. Last year, Pope Francis put out an inspired list of things we might consider fasting from, saying no to, so that we could say a greater yes. And perhaps on the list somewhere there might be chocolate or gelato, but Pope Francis went a little bit deeper, and I'll throw out an excerpted part of his list. Pope Francis invited us to consider fasting from sadness so that we might be filled with gratitude, that we might consider fasting from selfishness so that we might have room for being compassionate to others, to fast from worry and to trust in God, to fast from pessimism and to be filled with hope, and to fast from speaking words so that we might feast on listening. All of these habits have us saying no to a lesser so we could say yes to a greater, and that greater is relationship with God. And just like all relationships, it benefits from ongoing communication, real communication, and we call that prayer. Fasting makes room for prayer, makes room for us to open our hearts. And speaking of overcoming the evil army commander, it's been known for a long time that Catholics who have been captured as prisoners of war have been the least likely to be brainwashed. Catholics have been the least likely to be brainwashed when captured as prisoners of war because they've been able to turn to prayer. All those beautifully memorized prayers that reveal deeply and over time take root in our heart remind us of God's love for us, His desire for us. And they give us something beautiful to dwell on to avoid the temptation to succumb to the enemy. Indeed, may we always be devoted to spending more time talking with Jesus and talking through Jesus and developing friendship through Him to God the Father. Because that depth of our relationship with God in prayer is what leads us to be able to generously reveal Him to others. Prayer and deepening our relationship with God allows us to generously reveal Him to others. I'm reminded of a story of a wise man who journeyed far and came to a remote village. And as he was setting up his camp on the outskirts of the remote village, one of the villagers saw him and ran out to him very excitedly and said, "You're here. Please give it to me. Please give me the precious stone." And the wise man said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "It was revealed to me in a dream that I would find you here and you would give me riches that would last me for life. Would you give me the precious stone?" And the wise man reached in his bag and pulled out a diamond the size of a person's head and said, "Oh, you must mean this one. Here you go." And the villager couldn't believe it, but he took it and ran away excitedly and told all of his friends. Well, that night, the villager couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned all night. And first thing in the morning, he went back to the wise man, handed him back the diamond, and said, "Please give me instead the wealth that enables you to give this diamond away so freely." What is the depth of our wealth that enables us to be so generous with others? Who is the source of that wealth? Among my friends who are not practicing the faith right now, who are very much caught up in the secular world, I've noticed an increased trend to want to give back, to go out and be generous in giving things to those who are in need. And in the depth of those experiences of walking with them, it's opened up some beautiful reflections, some considerations on where does this come from? This desire to go out and be with and to give back. It comes from the source of generosity, who is more than just a good set of practices and principles, who is a person. And that person is God, who's fully revealed to us in the person of Jesus. My friends, let us always ask God for help in not only avoiding temptation, but in responding to his invitation to become who he is calling us to be. And let us thank him for the full advantage of this gift of the upcoming season of Lent, that we might fast from all that is not of God, so that we may feast on all that is of God, that we may grow ever deeper in most intimate communication with him in prayer, and from the depth of our heart give generously to others. In the process of doing so, that we become like the wise man, and perhaps more importantly, like the leper, our friend, humble, faithful, confident, and the recipient of Jesus' healing touch.